Anniversaries concentrate the mind, and for a British Orientalist as myself, it affords an opportunity not just to reflect, but also recall Churchill that the further back you look, the further forward you can see. In studying Pakistan, which turned 70 this August, there is that remarkable tendency of the state's custodians not to revise their policies, much less learn from successive setbacks. Political scientists, unlike Orientalists as myself, find it exasperating that states, inherently presupposed rational actors, do not opt for optimal outcomes, maximizing benefits and minimizing failures. Pakistan throws them, and so many others, especially Westerners, off balance. How and why does it pursue relentlessly self-defeating stratagems? Why plump for unlimited liabilities masked as developmental growth? Policy analysts expect revisionism, but as Christine Fair acutely notes, quote, Pakistan's revisionism is really quite a puzzle. There are very few states where the revisionism has persisted over such a durational time and with such pernicious outputs, close quote. And Pakistan rides out storms. And if it thinks this is due to an all-weather friendship with the People's Republic of China, then they are clearly making heavy weather of an asymmetrical, deliberately cynical relationship where Beijing has always assumed the mantle of a Marxist imperialist, a point in fact shared by other Afro-Asians within the developing world, which is privately but not publicly aired for the most obvious of reasons. Somehow the stench of racism always lingers when whites are involved, because we coloreds by default cannot be racist or rapacious. Not a few of these victims of cynic neocolonialism, such as the Nigerians, Sri Lankans, and Tanzanians, must rue deriding the Pax Americana, an unwilling empire more than happy for others to take the slack now. And one can, thanks to the internet, comfortably grasp the pulse of Pakistani thinking. That colorful Pakistani analyst, and there are no such shortages in South Asia, Aurea Maqbool Jan did yield some ground to Neo News' anchor Jamil Faruqi recently when it was pointed out that at least the West brings some benefits and mutually shares them. Can the same be said for the Chinese? Maqbool Jan concurred and remains skeptical of this CPEC panjandrum, best summed up again by Christine Fair at Georgetown University as CPEC, colonizing Pakistan to enrich China. And Maqbool Jan's misgivings are shared by not a few commentators in recent months on Pakistani television. And these apprehensions are entirely justified, with Senator Tahir Mashhadi, chair of the Senate's Standing Committee on Planning and Development, going so far as to query Planning and Interior Minister Ahsan Iqbal whether this isn't a new East India Company in the offing. Here we evince the voice of not just specialists, but the common man, many of whom, while Pakistani patriots, are reticent to wax eloquent about this grand scheme. They are right, and Islamabad officialdom is wrong. Everyone stands to lose, not just the Baluch fishermen who remain beguiled and bewildered in the environs of Gwadar, that is, when they're not silenced or deliberately absconded, thanks to the Punjabi Pashtun nexus of the frontier constabulary. Distraught Baluch relatives are long used to locating cadavers of missing relatives stuffed with human feces, according to both Baloch and Pakistan human rights NGOs. There is no precedent for this anywhere else in the Muslim world, and certainly not in either Palestine or Kashmir. Insurgencies which animate Muslims and their liberal acolytes, in a word, apologists, who display correspondingly far less reticent to talk about such murderous mendacity when Muslims do the oppressing of fellow Muslims. For instance, Habib University Karachi's social anthropologist Hafiz Jamali, also current director of Quetta's Balochistan Archives, has highlighted how, in combating insurgents across the province, supposedly targeted operations are anything but that. For security forces routinely, harshly, and collectively visit severest penalties, leading to fatalities on residents domiciled along the CPEC corridor's envisaged route, namely Khozdar, Keech, Panjgur, and Avaran districts. Islamabad would never, for instance, chastise Beijing for prohibiting Xinjiang's Sunni Uyghur university students and civil service personnel from fasting during Ramadan. Not a pipsqueak from the rest of the Islamic world as such. And it tells one not a little about Muslims and their selective outrage. Coverage, again, so routinely selective, which does not highlight Beijing's enthusiastic supply of weaponry during the 1980s to the Afghan Mujahideen, as studied by John Cooley in Unholy Wars, Afghanistan, America, and International Terrorism, 1999. And Beijing would prefer this not to be discussed, or even the pros and cons of the CPEC initiative, as Pakistani bloggers have come to realize under increasing pressure from higher-ups. Its long-term impact on Balochistan and the northern areas, both outlier provinces of Pakistan, underdeveloped, underpopulated, underrated, or at least considered as an afterthought by mainstream Pakistanis domiciled, harboring brooding resentments against those in the plains, namely Punjab. Baltistanis or Balochis, whether Shia or Sunni, are non-stakeholders and have no say, much less cause to celebrate their questionable accession 70 years on into the house that Jinnah built with frenzied determination during the last 2 years of his life, marked by, quote, whiskey, willpower, and cigarettes. That late Pakistani statesman, Yaqub Khan, did the answering all those years ago as Foreign Secretary of Pakistan, which may be lost on many. Turning to Lawrence Eagleburger, Deputy Secretary of State in 1991, Yaqub Khan, comparing notes at the end of the Cold War, exclaimed to him, quote, China wants perestroika without glasnost, close quote. And glasnost, rather its absence, is the telling feature of the China-Pakistan economic corridor. Beijing's sixth which was announced by Premier Xi Jinping, General Secretary of the CCP, in October 2013 as One Belt, One Road OBOR, a two-pronged initiative consisting of the Silk Road Economic Belt and 21st Century Maritime Silk Road. CPEC is within the ambit of both and in keeping with Xi's perceptible shift in Chinese foreign policy from maintaining a low-profile Tao Guang Yanghue to striving for achievement Fen Fa Yue. The chronology then runs like this. Premier Li Keqiang first broached an economic corridor with President Zardari in 2013. Enter Nawaz Sharif, who alongside President Mamnoon Hussain made several junkets to take it further from the drawing board through 2014. It was formally proclaimed in November 2014 as a 46 billion plan covering energy and infrastructure projects across Pakistan, for which in September 2016, it announced a $51.6 billion loan. In April 2017, CPEC investment was topped up by Beijing to $62 billion. A prognosis is in order. The CPEC, a 3,218-kilometer industrial corridor encompassing rail lines, highways, pipelines, digital arteries, and energy infrastructural bases, developmental as well as regeneration across Pakistan, and its 29 special industrial zones flanks the principal corridor. It is expected to be operational by 2020. Estimated costs, according to Deloitte and Touche, stand at 75 billion, of which Beijing will loan to Islamabad 45 billion. It is touted as the grandest foreign direct investment in Pakistan since the 70s, and which will constitute, quote, 17% of Pakistan's GDP, leading to 700,000 direct jobs between the years 2015 through 30. 80% of China's oil imports take a good 2 to 3 months between the Straits of Malacca and Shanghai, some 16,000 kilometers. With the bartering of Balochistan in the very first phase, namely leasing of Gwadar port for 40 years, the distance is reduced to 5,000 kilometers. Tax concessions do come into effect for both Gwadar port and the special economic zone, that is complete exemption, for 40 and 23 years respectively. As IMF surveys correctly suggest, 28 billion of the proposed investment has been allocated for early harvest projects, 18 billion for power projects, and 10 for rail, road, and port infrastructure, with the rest expected to materialize by 2013 and beyond. And the IMF reasonably posits, which I quote, the CPEC could go a long way towards alleviating Pakistan's long-standing supply-side bottlenecks and lifting its long-term potential output. Power supply, at least in the initial stage, will improve for exports. And transport infrastructure, roads, rails, and ports will allow easier and low-cost access to domestic and overseas markets, promoting interregional and international merchandise trade. But the Sharif brothers, hardly economists, much less statesmen, might care to heed what the rest of that report mentions and dovetails with the sentiments of business leaders and economists, to say nothing of State Bank of Pakistan economists. During the investment phase, as the report of the IMF continues, Pakistan will see a surge in FDI and other external inflows. A concomitant increase in import of machinery, industrial raw materials and services will likely offset a significant share of these inflows, such as the current account deficit would widen with manageable net inflows into the balance of payments. But it continues with the rider. As IPPs, independent power producers, start operations, profit repatriation by these companies would begin to rise in the subsequent years. And repayment obligations of CPEC-related government borrowings, including amortization and interest payments, are expected to rise after 2020-2021 due to concessional terms. Combined, these CPEC-related outflows could reach about 0.4% of Pakistan's GDP per annum over the longer term, close quote. Hefty tax concessions for Balochistan's Gwadar and port and airport are scheduled already as per 2017. And it has also been pointed out that all CPEC contractors, Islamabad has been required to accept that all CPEC contracts it signs must be with Chinese contractors who are not obliged to partner with local manufacturers, supply chains, or firms. Tax incentives being offered go against the State Bank of Pakistan's advice. And all CPEC power projects, thermal or hydro, will be exempt from corporate taxes for a lifetime. Profit repatriation by these IPPs will rise during the middle harvest phase, which will also see repayment obligations on government borrowings, particularly after 2020 or 2021. And such outflows, as I said, are 0.4% of the GDP, even as Pakistan repays this 75 billion over a 30-year repayment period at approximately 4.5% to 5% per annum. Interest outflows on this will be at the very least 3 to 3.5 billion per annum. That corruption has not been factorized is another niggling matter. Lack of clarity, to say nothing of accurate, complete details shared from Islamabad with the Council of Common Interests, a constitutional body for resolving differences with the provinces, never mind the private sector, need not be reiterated. That Beijing's state-run firms are merely dumping themselves on Pakistan, just as Pakistan dumps Baloch bodies, is little realized but by economists who note that China intends to dump excess capacity, particularly in Xinjiang, and bail out its public sector enterprises whose accounting practices are opaque, if not stir-fried. Pakistan need not look forward to any technological transfers too. The Chinese, the world's worst polluters, retain every intention of dumping through CPEC and extending the life of its heavy polluting industries on Pakistan. The termini of this route, as stated earlier, are restive impoverished outliers of Pakistan. Gilgit-Baltistan's arable lands stand at just 1% of its 73,000 square kilometers. Just where will the Hunza, Burusho, Baltites, Yashkuns, Shins, Pamiris, and Kohistanis, as well as historically domiciled Ladakhis, Kashmiris, Kashkari Turks, and Pashtuns go when outside investors come in to parcel out this hilly province, whose alpine ecosystem will be exposed to immense industrial upheavals and pollutants as never before in its history? The Pak-China Friendship, or Karakoram Highway, which begins here before winding down to Hazan Abdal in Islamabad, is anything but suitable geologically or ecologically for high-density lorry traffic, fiber optical cable installations, and rail lines. The 820-kilometer Rawalpindi-Khuncherab fiber optic cable will in the main run through Gilgit-Baltistan for some 466.54 kilometers. And Beijing has long sought to bypass Western intelligence, snooping on its communications, and this in reality is the raison d'etre of this initiative, which otherwise compels it to traverse through the Mediterranean and Europe. The removal of the Bhasha Dam, inaugurated 5 times in the past 15 years and still incomplete, by Pakistan's Joint Cooperation Committee, the apex decision-making body handling CPEC, on November 14th this year merits mention. Its estimated costs at 14 billion and expected to submerge 100 kilometers of the Karakoram Highway, to say nothing of villages and farms dislocating 35,000 inhabitants. Pakistan obviously has not been able to fund it through the World Bank, Asian Development Bank, and China until now, when the Chinese decided to appropriate it in the CPEC, and I mean literally appropriate. For it demanded Pakistan divest complete ownership, operation and maintenance cost by pledging another operational dam, according to WAPDA chairman Muzammil Hussain, which was completely not acceptable to Islamabad. But let me end with recent security notice, one issued by the Chinese Embassy Islamabad on December 11, 2017, to exercise caution due to a credible threat to Chinese citizens and organizations across Pakistan. And several attacks already have taken place involving CPEC projects. I pointed out this July in my parliamentary lecture at the House of Lords that the Chinese will tolerate no sabotage of their investment by disgruntled Muslim elements and will refuse to distinguish between the resentment of displaced, dissatisfied civilians, Baluchis, Baltis, Hunzais, Sindhis or Pashtuns, and the terror proxies sponsored and subvented by the Pakistani intelligence military nexus. Finally, and this is well worth noting, in November 2001, the New Yorker magazine, a month on from Operation Enduring Freedom, the Allied campaign to liberate Afghanistan, Professor Bernard Lewis ominously wrote, quote, "Sooner or later, Al-Qaeda and related groups will clash with the other neighbors of Islam, Russia, China, and India, who may prove less squeamish than the Americans in using their power against Muslims and their sanctities." Close quote. Thank you.